Bungalows rusty and elderly golden. Retriever mixed with a graying muzzle. And soulful brown eyes padded softly. Along the sidewalk his worn paws moving. With the deliberate care of a dog who had seen more than his fair share of years. Once a beloved family pet, Rusty had found himself alone in the world. After his elderly owner passed away now, he roamed the streets of Oak Brook, a gentle vagrant who had captured the hearts of many residents despite numerous attempts to bring him into a shelter. Rusty always managed to slip away, preferring the freedom of the outdoors to the confines of a kennel. As Rusty made his nightly rounds, he paused at the corner of Elm and Fourth, where Mrs. Aboney, a kindly widow, always left a bowl of fresh water and some kibble on her porch. The old dog lapped up the cool water gratefully, his tail wagging in appreciation of the simple kindness. "There you are, you old rascal," Mrs. Aboney called from her window. "You be careful out there tonight, you hear?" Rusty looked up, his intelligent eyes seeming to understand every word. He gave a soft woof in response before continuing on his way, his nose twitching as he caught the scent of tonight's dinner wafting from nearby homes. As he approached Stoke Brook Community Park, a faint sound caught Rusty's attention. His ears perked up, swiveling to pinpoint the source. It was unlike anything he'd heard before, a high-pitched mewing cry that tugged at something deep within his canine instincts. Curious and concerned, Rusty deviated from his usual path, following the sound into the park. The cry grew louder as Rusty approached a row of trash cans near the playground. His nose working overtime, he circled the metal containers, trying to locate the source of the distressing noise. Finally he stopped at the last can, rearing up on his hind legs to peer inside. What Rusty saw made his heart race. There, nestled among discarded fast food wrappers and crumpled newspapers, was a tiny wriggling bundle. A human baby no more than a few days old lay wrapped in a thin blanket, its face scrunched up in distress as it cried out weakly. For a moment Rusty froze, overwhelmed by the gravity of what he discovered. Then, driven by an instinct as old as time, he knew he had to act with the gentleness of a mother cat carrying her kittens. Rusty carefully gripped the edge of the blanket in his teeth and lifted the baby from the trash. The infant's cries subsided slightly as it felt the warmth of Rusty's fur holding the precious bundle securely but gently. Rusty knew he needed to find help, and fast. The baby was cold and its cries were growing weaker by the minute. With a sense of urgency he hadn't felt in years, Rusty began to trot out of the park, his mind racing. Where could he take this tiny human who would understand and help? As he reached the street, a memory flickered in his aging brain, the kind face of Margaret, a retired nurse who lived in the blue house on Sycamore Street. Rusty had often seen Margaret tending to injured birds and stray cats in her yard. If anyone would know what to do, it would be her. With renewed determination, Rusty picked up his pace, careful not to jostle his fragile cargo. The streets were mostly empty as night fell, but the few people still out gasped in shock at the sight of the old dog carrying what appeared to be a baby. A teenager on a bike nearly crashed into a lamppost, doing a double take as Rusty hurried past. As Rusty turned onto Sycamore Street, he could see the warm glow of Margaret's porch light in the distance. His legs were growing tired, unused to such exertion, but he pressed on. The baby's life depended on him now. With each step Rusty's resolve strengthened. He may have been old, he may have been astray, but at this moment he was this little one's guardian and protector. As he approached Margaret's house, he could see her silhouette through the living room window, settling down for a quiet evening. With a book, Rusty climbed the 3 steps to Margaret's porch. His legs trembling with exhaustion, he gently laid the baby down on the welcome mat, making sure the blanket was secure. Then, summoning the last of his strength, he let out a series of sharp, urgent barks, a sound he hadn't made in years. Through the window, Rusty saw Margaret startle and look up from her book. He barked again, praying she would come to the door. Quickly the baby stirred, letting out a feeble cry as Margaret's footsteps approached the door. Rusty took a step back, his heart pounding. He had done all he could. Now it was up to Margaret to save this life. The porch light flickered on and the door began to open. The door creaked open and Margaret Thorne's eyes widened in shock. At first she saw only Rusty, the neighborhood stray she'd often admired from afar, but then her gaze dropped to the bundle at his feet and she gasped, "Oh, my goodness!" Margaret whispered, dropping to her knees. With trembling hands she reached for the blanket, her nurse's instincts kicking in immediately as she unwrapped the infant. A tiny face, blue with cold, came into view. "You poor little thing," she murmured, scooping up the baby and cradling it close. Rusty whined softly, his tail wagging with relief. Margaret looked at the old dog with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "You clever boy," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've saved this child's life." As Margaret rushed inside with the baby, Rusty followed, unwilling to leave his charge in the warm light of her living room. Margaret's trained eye quickly assessed the situation. The baby was dangerously cold, its breathing shallow. "Hold on, little one," Margaret said, her mind racing back to her days in the NICU. It had been years since she'd cared for a newborn, but the knowledge came flooding back like muscle memory as she worked to warm the infant. Memories of her time as a nurse washed over her. For 30 years Margaret had been a beacon of hope in the neonatal intensive care unit at Chicago Memorial Hospital. She cradled countless premature babies, comforted worried parents, and celebrated miraculous recoveries, but retirement had left her feeling adrift, her wealth of knowledge and compassion seemingly wasted now. As she wrapped the baby in warm towels and gently rubbed its tiny limbs, Margaret felt a renewed sense of purpose surging through her. With one hand she reached for her phone and dialed 911. "Emergency services, what's your situation?" came the calm voice on the other end. "This is Margaret Thorne at 1542 Sycamore Street," she replied, her own voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I have a newborn infant, possibly only a few days old, suffering from hypothermia. I need an ambulance immediately." As she relayed the details to the dispatcher, Margaret continued to work on the baby slowly. Its color began to improve and its cries grew stronger. Rusty sat nearby, his eyes never leaving the infant, occasionally whining softly as if to offer encouragement. Within minutes the wail of sirens filled the air. 2 paramedics, a young woman named Aisha and her partner, a seasoned veteran called Frank, burst through the door. "Over here," Margaret called, still cradling the baby. As the paramedics approached, their eyes darted between Margaret, the infant, and Rusty, trying to make sense of the scene. "Ma'am, can you tell us what happened?" Aisha asked as she knelt beside Margaret, already reaching for her medical bag. Margaret quickly recounted Rusty's incredible rescue, watching as the paramedics' expressions shifted from professional focus to amazement. "I've been on this job for 20 years, Frank said, shaking his head in disbelief, "but I've never seen anything like this. That dog is a hero." As Aisha prepared to transport the baby, Margaret felt a sudden reluctance to let go. I was a NICU nurse for 3 decades, she found herself saying. "Would it be all right if I accompanied you to the hospital?" The paramedics exchanged a glance before nodding. "Your expertise could be invaluable," Frank agreed as they made their way to the ambulance. Rusty tried to follow. "Oh, we can't leave him," Margaret insisted. "He saved this child. He deserves to see this through." Against protocol but moved by the extraordinary circumstances, the paramedics allowed Rusty into the ambulance as they sped towards Chicago Memorial. Margaret held the baby close with Rusty head resting on her lap. At the hospital they were met by Dr. Liam Reeves, the ONL pediatrician. His eyebrows shot up as he took in the unusual group exiting the ambulance: 2 paramedics, an elderly woman, a dog, and a tiny patient. "Dr. Reeves," Margaret said, recognizing her former colleague, "this baby needs immediate attention, and wait until you hear how it got here." As they rushed into the emergency room, Margaret quickly filled Dr. Reeves in on the incredible rescue. The doctor's face paled as he examined the infant. "My God," he muttered, "if that dog hadn't found this baby when he did." He trailed off, not needing to finish the grim thought as the medical team worked to stabilize the infant. Margaret found herself falling easily back into her role as a nurse, offering insights and assistance that proved invaluable. Dr. Reeves, initially skeptical of having a retired nurse and a dog in his ER, soon found himself grateful for Margaret's expertise and Rusty's calming presence. Hours passed in a blur of activity as dawn broke. Dr. Reeves approached Margaret, who was sitting in a chair with Rusty at her feet. "Margaret," he said, his voice heavy with concern, "we've stabilized the baby. But there's something else. We've discovered a rare congenital condition that's going to require specialized care." Margaret felt her heart sink. After all the baby had been through, now this. She looked down at Rusty, who gazed back at her with those soulful eyes. In that moment she made a decision. "I'm staying," she declared. "This little one is going to need all the help it can get, and I may be retired, but I still have something to offer." Dr. Reeves nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I was hoping you'd say that we could use your experience, especially with a case like this." As the sun rose over Chicago, casting a warm glow through the hospital windows, Margaret felt a renewed sense of purpose washing over her. She looked at Rusty, still faithfully by her side, and then at the tiny baby fighting for life in the NICU. This was far from over, she realized. The real challenge was just beginning. But with Rusty's incredible act of heroism and her own rekindled passion for nursing, Margaret knew they were ready to face whatever came next. Little did she know the biggest surprises were yet to come. Block 3. Complications and rising action. As the morning sun climbed higher in the Chicago sky, the quiet halls of the hospital's pediatric wing were abuzz with activity. News of the abandoned baby's miraculous rescue by a stray dog had spread like wildfire, capturing the hearts of staff and patients alike. At The center of it all were Margaret Rusty and the tiny fighter in the NICU now, known affectionately as Baby Hope. Detective May Chen of the Chicago PD strode purposefully down the corridor, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. She'd been assigned to the case task, as with unraveling the mystery of Baby Hope's abandonment. As she approached the NICU, she spotted Margaret dozing in a chair outside with Rusty loyally at her feet. "Mrs. Thorne," Detective Chen said, softly rousing Margaret from her light sleep. Margaret blinked quickly, orienting herself. "Oh, Detective, any news?" Chen shook her head. "Not yet, I'm afraid, but I wanted to update you on our progress and ask a few more questions." As they talked, Chen couldn't help but be moved by Margaret's dedication and Rusty's unwavering presence. It was clear that this odd pair had formed a powerful bond with Baby Hope. "We've put out alerts and are checking surveillance footage from the park," Chen explained, "but I have to warn you, cases like these, they're not always easy to solve." Margaret nodded solemnly, absently stroking Rusty's head. "I understand, but we can't give up. This little one deserves to know where they came from." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion down the hall. A stern-faced man in a suit was arguing with a nurse, his voice carrying clearly to where they sat. "I don't care about your policies. That dog is a stray and a potential health hazard. It needs to be removed and taken to a shelter immediately." Margaret stood up, her face flushing with anger. "Excuse me, Detective," she said, marching towards the confrontation with Rusty close behind. As they approached, Margaret recognized the man as Gerald Hawkins, the overzealous head of the local animal control department. She'd had run-ins with him before when advocating for the neighborhood strays. "Mr. Hawkins," Margaret interjected, her voice firm, "Rusty is not just some stray. He's a hero who saved a baby's life. He has every right to be here." Hawkins turned, his eyes narrowing. "Mrs. Thorne, I might have known you'd be involved. Hero or not, regulations are regulations. That dog needs to come with me." Dr. Reeves, attracted by the commotion, joined the group. "What seems to be the problem here?" "As the situation was explained," Dr. Reeves looked thoughtful. "Mr. Hawkins, while I understand your concerns, Rusty's presence has been incredibly beneficial for Baby Hope. In fact, he paused, an idea forming. What if we were to officially register Rusty as a therapy dog in training?" Margaret's eyes lit up at the suggestion, but Hawkins remained skeptical. "That's not how it works. There are procedures, certifications, which we're willing to fast-track." Dr. Reeves counted. "Given the extraordinary circumstances, I'm sure we can work something out. In the meantime, I'll take personal responsibility for Rusty's presence here." Hawkins sputtered, clearly unhappy but unable to argue with the doctor's authority. "Fine," he conceded, "but I'll be watching this situation closely." With a final glare at Rusty, he stormed off. As the tension dissipated, Margaret turned to Dr. Reeves gratefully. "Thank you, Liam. I don't know what we'd do if Rusty had to leave." Dr. Reeves smiled, but his eyes were serious. "It's the least I could do, but Margaret, we need to talk about Baby Hope's condition. It's more complicated than we initially thought." Inside the NICU, Dr. Reeves pulled up Baby Hope's latest test results on a monitor. "The condition is called tetralogy of Fott with pulmonary atria. It's a complex congenital heart defect that's going to require specialized surgery." Margaret GPED softly, her years of experience telling her just how serious this was. "Oh, Liam, what are the Odds. Dr. Reeves ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that betrayed his stress. It's risky, especially in a newborn this small, but it's our only option. As they discussed the intricacies of the procedure, Margaret noticed a shadow pass over Dr. Reeves's face. Liam, what is it? You're not telling me, the doctor sighed heavily. It's just I've only performed this surgery once before during my residency. The baby didn't make it. I've been avoiding pediatric cardiology ever since. Margaret reached out, squeezing his arm supportively. Liam, that was years ago. You're one of the best doctors I know. If anyone can do this, it's you. Their conversation was interrupted by a nurse rushing in. Dr. Reeves, Miss Thorne, there's a couple in the waiting room claiming to be baby Hope's parents. Exchanging a startled look, Margaret and Dr. Reeves hurried to the waiting room with Rusty trotting close behind. There they found Detective Chen already speaking with a young couple who looked nervous but eager. Mr. and Mrs. Ellison, Detective Chen said as Margaret and Dr. Reeves approached. This is Mrs. Thorne and Dr. Reeves, who have been caring for the baby. The woman, tears in her eyes, stepped forward. Is she okay, our baby girl? Margaret felt a mix of emotions: relief that baby H's parents might have been found, but also a nagging sense of unease. Something about the couple's body language which struck her as off. As Detective Chen began to ask the couple questions about the baby and the circumstances of her abandonment, Margaret watched closely. Their answers seemed rehearsed, lacking the raw emotion she'd expect from parents who had abandoned their child in desperation. Rusty, who had been quietly observing, suddenly let out a low growl, his eyes fixed on the couple. The man, startled, took a step back. Keep that mud away from us. Detective Chen eyes narrowed at the reaction. Is there a problem, Mr. Ellison? As the detective continued her questioning, the inconsistencies in the couple's story began to mount. Finally, under the combined pressure of Chen's interrogation, Margaret's skeptical gaze, and Rusty's unwavering stare, the couple's facade cracked. All right, the woman cried out. We're not her parents. We heard about the reward for information. We thought if we could claim her we could. Detective Chen cut her off, her voice cold. You're both under arrest for attempted fraud and interfering with a police investigation, as the false parents were led away. Margaret felt a mix of disappointment and relief. She looked down at Rusty, who had relaxed once more and scratched behind his ears. Good boy, she murmured. You knew, didn't you? Dr. Reeves, who had watched the scene unfold in stunned silence, shook his head in disbelief. I can't believe someone would try to take advantage of a situation like this. People can surprise you, Margaret said softly, for better or for worse. As they turned to head back to the NICU, Dr. Reeves's pager went off. His face paled as he read the message. It's baby Hope, he said, his voice tight with worry. Her condition is deteriorating. We need to perform the surgery now. Margaret felt her heart race as they rushed back to the NICU, as the medical team prepared for the emergency surgery. She found herself whispering a quiet prayer. Hold on, little one, she murmured. We've come too far to lose you now. With Rusty by her side, Margaret watched as baby Hope was wheeled into surgery, Dr. Reeves leading the team. As the doors swung shut, she couldn't shake the feeling that the greatest challenge of this incredible journey was yet to come. The hours crept by like years as Margaret waited outside the operating room, her hand resting on Musty's head. For comfort the old dog hadn't moved an inch since baby Hope had been wheeled into surgery, his brown eyes fixed on the door as if willing it to open. Nurses and doctors rushed in and out, their faces masks of concentration each time the door swung open. Margaret's heart leaped, hoping for news, but it wasn't until the sky outside had darkened to a deep indigo that Dr. Reeves finally emerged, his surgical cap in hand and exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Margaret stood, her legs shaky from hours of sitting. Liam, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Reeves looked up, and for a moment Margaret's heart stopped, then slowly a smile spread across his face. She made it. Margaret, it was touch and go for a while, but she pulled through. She's a fighter, that one. The relief that flooded through Margaret was so intense that she had to sit down again. Rusty, sensing the change in mood, let out a soft, joyful bark. There's something else, Dr. Reeves continued, his tone becoming serious again. Detective Chen is here. They found the mother. As if on cue, Detective Chen rounded the corner, accompanied by a young girl who couldn't have been more than 16. The girl's eyes were red-rimmed from crying, and she kept wringing her hands nervously. Mrs. Thorne, Dr. Reeves, Chen said softly, this is Zoe Matthews. She's baby Hope's mother. Zoe looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Is my baby okay? I'm so sorry, I didn't know what to do. I was so scared. Margaret's heart went out to the girl standing up. She gently took Zoe's hands in her own. Your baby is going to be just fine, dear. She's very strong, just like her mother. As Zoe broke down in tears, Margaret led her to a chair, sitting beside her. Over the next hour, Zoe's story came tumbling out. She was a straight A student with dreams of becoming a doctor, but a single mistake at a party had led to an unplanned pregnancy. Terrified of disappointing her strict parents and ruining her chances at college, Zoe had hidden the pregnancy, giving birth alone in her bedroom. I panicked, Zoe sobbed. I wrapped her up and took her to the park. I thought someone would find her quickly. I never meant for her to be in danger. As soon as I got home, I realized what a terrible mistake I'd made. I've been trying to work up the courage to come forward ever since. Detective Chen, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. Zoe turned herself in this afternoon. Given the circumstances and her cooperation, we're working with the DA to ensure she's treated fairly. Dr. Reeves, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. Zoe, your daughter has a condition called tetralogy of Fott with pulmonary atresia. It's a serious heart defect, but we performed corrective surgery. She'll need ongoing care, but with proper treatment she can live a normal, healthy life. Zoe's eyes widened in shock and guilt. Oh God, if I had known, I never would have. Can I see her, please? Dr. Reeves nodded, his expression softening. She's in recovery now. I think it would do you both good to be together. As they prepared to visit the baby, Margaret felt a tug on her sleeve. It was Detective Chen. There's one more thing, the detective said, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. We found security camera footage from the park. You might want to see this. Chen pulled out a tablet and played a video. It showed Rusty finding the baby, but what happened next left Margaret breathless. The old dog had tried to alert several passers-by, but no one paid attention to the stray. Finally, Rusty had gently picked up the bundle and started his journey to find help. He knew exactly what he was doing, Chen said, awe evident in her voice. It's like he understood the baby needed more help than just the next person. Walking by, Margaret knelt down, wrapping her arms around Rusty. "You wonderful, brilliant boy," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "You're more than a hero, you're a guardian angel." Over the next few days, a flurry of activity surrounded baby Hope, now officially named Lily Hope Matthews. Zoe's parents, initially shocked and angry, rallied around their daughter and granddaughter with love and support. Social services worked closely with the family to ensure Zoe and Lily would have the support they needed. Margaret, unable to bear the thought of leaving Lily's case, came out of retirement to work part-time in the NICU with Rusty by her side as the hospital's newest therapy dog in training. Dr. Reeves, inspired by Lily's successful surgery and Margaret's unwavering dedication, decided to specialize in pediatric cardiology, determined to help more children like Lily. As for Rusty, his heroic deed had captured the hearts of the entire city. Donations poured in for his care, and Margaret officially adopted him, giving the old dog the loving home he deserved. One sunny afternoon a month after that fateful night, Margaret sat on a bench in Oak Brook Community Park with Rusty lounging at her feet. In her arms she cradled little Lily, now thriving and gurgling happily. Zoe sat beside them, her face glowing as she tickled her daughter's tiny feet. I never thought I'd be back here," Zoe said softly, looking around the park, "but now it feels like the beginning of something wonderful, not the end." Margaret smiled, watching as a butterfly landed briefly on Rusty's nose, making the old dog sneeze. "Life has a funny way of giving us second chances," she mused. "Sometimes we just need someone to show us the way." As if understanding her words, Rusty lifted his head, his soulful brown eyes meeting Margaret. In that moment, surrounded by the new life they had all been given, Margaret felt a profound sense of gratitude and purpose. The park where it had all begun was now a symbol of hope and new beginnings, a reminder that even in our darkest moments a helping hand or paw can change everything. As Lily said and reached out to pat Rusty's fur, Margaret knew that their incredible journey wasn't ending. In many ways it was just beginning. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe,